The episode begins with something completely ordinary. Peter and Brian are walking down the street, joking around, enjoying an evening stroll. Peter tells a dumb joke. Brian gives his usual sarcastic chuckle. Everything feels normal, until a stray dog, dirty, wild-looking, fur bristling, suddenly runs out from behind a parked car. It lunges at Brian, bites him, and bolts into the distance before Peter even realizes what happened. "Whoa! Brian, are you okay?" Peter shouts. Brian looks at him, and in that moment Peter freezes. Brian's pupils suddenly dilate, massively, unnaturally, spreading like black ink across his eyes. For a second, his expression goes blank, empty, like he doesn't recognize the world around him. "I'm fine," Brian says, too calmly, too emotionlessly, like he's repeating someone else's words. Peter doesn't believe him. The next day, Brian looks worse, much worse. His pupils stay huge even in bright light. The fur around his neck stands up as if permanently electrified. His canines are longer, sharper, visible even when his mouth is closed. He barely speaks, and when he does, it sounds like two voices are overlapping. That evening, he paces the house in long, quiet steps that leave no sound behind. Peter catches glimpses of his shadow bending strangely on the walls, lagging a half-second behind his movements. Stewie eventually says, "Peter, I'm taking him outside. I think something's wrong with him." And Stewie leaves with Brian. Hours pass, then Brian returns. Alone, Peter rushes to him. "Brian, where's Stewie? Where is he?" Brian looks up slowly and smiles, a huge, unnatural smile stretching too far across his muzzle. Then he starts laughing. Not a normal laugh, a broken, echoing, strangled laugh. Stewie never comes back. Terrified, Peter and Lois drive Brian to an animal shelter, hoping vets will help him. Medicine, testing, anything. The staff say they'll keep him under supervision. They promise everything is under control. Days pass. The house grows quiet, too quiet. One evening, Peter comes home earlier than usual. He opens the front door and instantly feels something wrong. The air inside is cold, heavy, unmoving. Lois? Chris? Meg? No voices, no footsteps, no sounds. He steps deeper into the house, and then he sees it. Brian is standing in the middle of the living room, but it isn't Brian anymore. Before Peter stands a massive creature, towering, monstrous. His neck fur has grown into a full bristling mane. His fangs are enormous, jutting out even when his mouth is closed. His limbs are thick, powerful, and his chest rises with slow, thunderous breaths. His eyes glow faintly red. And most terrifying of all, he stands upright on two legs, like a person. Shadows tremble around him as if the room is too small to contain him. Peter steps back. The creature steps forward, and in a soft, eerily gentle voice it says, "I came back, Peter." The episode opens calmly. Brian is sitting on the living room couch, a little too happy, a little too relaxed, smiling in a way that lingers just a bit longer than it should. He flips through TV channels with an unusual lightness, as if nothing in the world could bother him. When Lois walks through the front door, she immediately notices how quiet the house feels. "Brian?" she calls. "Where's Peter?" Brian doesn't even look up. No idea, he must have gone out somewhere. His voice is calm, unnaturally calm, as though he had rehearsed the line in advance. Lois watches him for a few seconds longer than normal. Something about his expression seems off. The smile too steady, the eyes too relaxed. That night, the house is filled with heavy silence. Lois lies in bed alone. Peter still hasn't come home. She's drifting off when she hears soft footsteps climbing the stairs. The bedroom door slowly opens. Brian stands in the doorway. He looks at her with wide, calm eyes and quietly asks, "Do you want me to sleep with you tonight?" Lois freezes. "Brian, that's inappropriate." Peter's not here," he interrupts softly. "But I am." And before she can react, Brian climbs into the bed beside her as if it's completely natural. Lois stays rigid, unsure what to do. What disturbs her more than anything is how quickly Brian falls asleep. Perfectly still, perfectly peaceful, as if everything is unfolding exactly the way he wants. The next few days get even stranger. Brian begins acting like the head of the household, cooking breakfast, checking on the kids, reminding everyone about chores. He's cheerful, too cheerful. He seems to be slipping into Peter's role piece by piece. The mannerisms, the confidence, the authority. And the most unsettling part, no one besides Lois seems to notice. Whenever she asks where Peter is, Brian answers, "He'll be back soon." But his eyes never match the smile. One evening, Lois hears a faint noise in the basement, a weak, pained groan. Heart pounding, she slowly descends the stairs and switches on the dim basement light. And she almost screams. In the far corner, lying on the floor, bruised, tied, and barely breathing, is Peter. When he sees her, he struggles to lift his head and whispers, "Lois, he won't let me out." She falls to her knees beside him, frantically trying to untie his wrists. Her hands shake, but just as she loosens the knot, the light flickers. The basement door creaks open. Brian stands at the top of the stairs. He isn't surprised. He isn't scared. He looks annoyed, as if Lois has broken a rule he set. He descends 2 steps and says quietly, "You shouldn't have come down here, Lois. I told you not to." Lois positions herself in front of Peter, shielding him. "What did you do to him?" she screams. Brian doesn't answer the question. He simply reaches up and closes the basement door with unsettling calm. Clank. The lock drops into place on the outside. "You two stay here," he says. "The family needs order, and I can give it to them." The light flickers again. Peter's breathing is shallow. Lois pounds on the door, yelling, but the house stays silent. The final shot shows Brian walking back upstairs, steady and deliberate. Behind him, from the basement, we hear Lois calling out for the kids, but no one answers.
It started small, so small that Lois didn't think twice about it. One morning, Stewie sat at the table, unusually quiet, staring at nothing with a strange, fixed expression. He didn't complain, didn't insult Brian, didn't threaten to build a weapon. He just sat there with his hands folded perfectly still. Lois joked, "Wow, Stewie, you're being so well-behaved today." He slowly turned his head toward her, too slowly, and said, "I'm learning." Brian was the first to notice that Stewie's pupils had changed. They looked narrower, sharper. When Brian asked him about it, Stewie smiled, a small, unsettling smile, and replied, "Evolution requires adjustment." But his voice sounded doubled, like another faint whisper was speaking along with him. A day later, Stewie stopped blinking. Entire conversations went by, and his eyes stayed open. Chris mentioned hearing Stewie walk around the house at night, but said the footsteps didn't sound like his. Too heavy, too long between steps. Meg said she saw Stewie standing in the hallway at 3 a.m., facing the wall, whispering something that sounded like numbers. Lois tried to comfort herself, telling Peter that Stewie was just going through a phase. But one evening, she saw Stewie's silhouette stretch across the wall in a way no light could naturally create, bending, elongating, twisting as if something inside him was rearranging. The next morning, Stewie didn't eat. He just sat at the table staring at each family member in perfect silence. When Brian asked him what he was looking at, Stewie answered, "I'm learning how to replace unnecessary things." By the 3rd day, his skin tone looked a shade too pale. His head shape seemed almost wrong, slightly uneven, as if it was becoming something that didn't belong in a cartoon baby's body. He stopped using his usual vocabulary. Instead of his sarcastic wit, he spoke in short, flat phrases. "The house is changing. You don't see yourselves clearly. You'll understand soon. That night, Lois awoke to the sound of dragging across the hallway floor, like slow, rhythmic, like something being pulled. When she opened the door, the hall was empty, but the floorboards were scratched in long, straight lines leading to Stewie's room. She opened his door. The crib was empty. The window reflected nothing back at her, just blackness, as though the world outside had vanished. The next morning, Stewie reappeared at the table as if nothing happened, but he was taller, his limbs slightly too long, his onesie stretched tight around joints that weren't shaped the same way anymore. "Stewie, honey, are you okay?" Lois asked. He looked at her with that same empty stare and whispered, "Almost." That evening, Peter went down to the basement to look for him and never came back. Lois assumed he'd fallen asleep down there, but Brian felt something wrong in the air. He refused to go down the stairs. By the fourth night, only Lois dared to search. She went into the basement, calling Peter's name. No answer. The lights flickered as she descended. At the bottom, she saw something in the corner. Small at first, sitting with its back turned. "Stewie?" she whispered. The figure turned toward her. It was Stewie's face, but stretched, warped. The features too wide apart, the smile too thin, the eyes too deep, not blinking, not breathing in any recognizable rhythm. "Mother," it said, but the voice wasn't Stewie's. It was layered, distorted, echoing around the basement. "I finished learning." Lois stumbled back, shaking her head, whispering, "You're not my baby. You're not him." The creature took a single step and the lights above them dimmed almost to black. "I am what he became," it said. "And now, you will stay with me." The basement door slammed shut behind her. The lock clicked. The light died. When the camera cuts, the final scene shows the Griffin living room. Meg, Chris, and Brian sit quietly on the couch, staring blankly forward. In Stewie's little red chair sits the new Stewie, perfectly calm, perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, watching the family like an observer. He tilts his head just slightly. The screen cuts to black.
This episode didn't start the way Family Guy episodes normally do. There was no intro, no theme music, just a static shot of the Griffin house from what looked like a security camera. Peter was sitting on the couch, staring at a turned-off TV, too still, too straight. The rest of the family stood behind him in a half circle, not moving, not speaking. The first sound in the episode wasn't their voices. It was a warped, reversed audio clip, so quiet it sounded like it came from another tape entirely. After it played, Peter slowly turned to the front door and said, "Lois, we should go outside now." Lois walked to the door, touched the handle, and froze. The door didn't budge. She pulled harder. Nothing. Chris tried slamming into it with his shoulder, but instead of a wooden thud, the sound was hollow, metallic, like he was hitting a steel wall. Peter went to the window, but there was no street outside, no houses, just a blank white fog, perfectly still, like someone forgot to finish drawing the background. "This must be an editing error," Peter muttered, but the tone of his voice was wrong. Empty, like he was reading a line he didn't understand. Stewie noticed another detail. Every clock in the house had stopped at the exact same time. 3:17. Not moving. On the stove, on the microwave, on the phones. Even his own digital watch read 3:17. Meg tried to say something, but no sound came out. Her mouth moved, but the world had no audio for her. Brian barked her name, but suddenly the volume of everything in the house dropped, as if someone was turning down the sliders of reality. The camera shook slightly, like whoever was holding it breathed too hard. Peter returned to the door and said, "It should open. It always opened." He repeated it again and again. Same intonation, same pauses, like an audio clip looping. The house started changing. The kitchen lights flickered off, and when they flicked back on, the chairs were in different positions. Every family photo on the wall had been replaced with identical pictures of an empty room. 3:17 still glowed on every clock. Lois walked into the hallway and came back out of the same doorway she had just entered, even though that wasn't possible. She tried again, Same result. The house had folded in on itself. Brian suddenly noticed movement on the TV. It had turned on by itself. On the screen was a live feed of the Griffin living room, their living room. But the angle was wrong, like it came from somewhere impossibly high. "Peter, look at this," Brian said, but Peter was facing the wall, whispering, "It should open, it should open," in a perfectly looped rhythm. The image on the TV zoomed in. There they were, Peter, Lois, Meg, Chris, Stewie, Brian, standing exactly where they were standing now. Except their versions on the screen didn't have faces, just smooth surfaces where faces should be. Lois stepped closer to the TV. On the screen, the faceless Lois stepped closer too, but closer than she should have been. A full step closer. The broadcast glitched, zoomed in again. Now the faceless Lois was pressed right up against the imaginary lens. Lois staggered back in fear. The room lights flickered. When they returned, Meg was gone. Nobody reacted to her disappearance, as if she had never been there. Brian rushed to the door and pulled, but the wooden texture of the door felt wrong. Too smooth, too cold. It wasn't wood anymore. It was metal. Lois screamed Stewie's name as he ran into the kitchen and vanished mid-step. The doorway he passed through was now a solid wall. The windows sank into the paint and disappeared. The hallway shortened. Peter stood in the middle of the living room, motionless, repeating 317 over and over as his voice degraded into tape hiss. Brian was alone with him. Then the TV turned on again. The same living room. Only one figure now stood inside it. A tall silhouette with no face, no features, just staring. The camera zoomed in slowly, painfully slowly, as if dragged forward frame by frame. Brian looked around. Everyone else was gone. The house had become a perfect square, featureless, exitless. And in the corner of the room stood a tall shadow that hadn't been there before, facing Brian, closer than it should have been. The camera zoomed into its blank face. The screen cut to black. The lost episode of Family Guy, Dead Air. The episode kicks off with a classic setup. The Griffin family is gathered in the living room for a night of TV. But the routine is shattered when the screen abruptly cuts to black, followed by an ear-splitting blast of white noise so intense that Brian drops his martini in shock. While Lois immediately nags Peter about unpaid cable bills, Peter reveals the stupidity behind the situation. He actually bought this television for $1 at the estate sale of a creepy old hermit who died under mysterious circumstances just last week. As the static clears, the image on the screen resolves into something deeply unsettling. It's a live feed of their own living room, but it's grainy, black and white, and shot from a high, impossible angle, like a security camera. Suddenly, the on-screen kitchen door opens, and Peter walks out. But it's not their Peter. This anti-Peter has hollow black voids for eyes, and a frozen, unnaturally wide rictus grin. The entity on the screen slowly turns its head, looking directly out of the television and locking eyes with the real family. The real Peter tries to crack a joke to break the tension, but the screen monster slowly raises a hand and points a finger directly at Meg. In that exact second, the entire house plunges into darkness. When the lights flicker back on, the spot on the couch where Meg was sitting is empty. Brian notes the air smells like ozone, and Stewie is the first to spot the horror. Meg is now trapped inside the television. She's silently pounding on the glass from the other side, trapped in a warped, pulsating nightmare version of their home. Panic sets in. Peter decides to fix things with his trademark percussive maintenance and smashes his fist onto the top of the TV set. Instead of fixing it, the machine arcs with electricity and fires a bolt of energy that zaps Chris. In a flash of light, Chris vanishes from the room and reappears on the screen next to a terrified Meg. The remaining survivors, Peter, Lois, Stewie, and Brian retreat and barricade themselves in the kitchen. Stewie quickly deduces what's happening. The TV is a portal to a dimension of eternal suffering that feeds on the family's idiocy, and Peter is acting as its primary battery. Their strategy session is interrupted by a terrifying sound from the other side of the kitchen door. A distorted, metallic voice croaks out a glitched, giggity giggity goo, sounding like grinding gears. The door is ripped off its hinges, revealing a monstrosity. It's Quagmire, but transformed into a techno-horror abomination. His body is a tangled mass of rusted cables and wires, and replaced his head is an old CRT monitor broadcasting a giant, leering eye. The techno-Quagmire extends its wire tentacles toward Lois. Peter, offended that someone else is trying to grope his wife on a weeknight, grabs a toaster for self-defense. The family charges past the monster, making a break for the living room. On the main screen, they see the cartoon versions of Chris and Meg running through a labyrinth of VHS tapes, chased by the giant, black-eyed anti-Peter. Stewie barks out the plan. Brian needs to distract the Quagmire beast. Brian reluctantly starts a dry, pointless political debate with the monster, which confuses the creature just long enough for it to pause. Seizing the moment, Peter lets out a ridiculous battle cry and jams the plugged-in toaster directly into the center of the cursed TV screen. A massive explosion rocks the room. The glass shatters, and a vortex of blue energy spits Chris and Meg back onto the living room rug, covered in some kind of interdimensional ectoplasm. The techno-Quagmire behind them crumbles into a pile of harmless scrap metal. The lights stabilize. The family is reunited, though the kids are clearly traumatized. Peter wraps things up with a completely nonsensical moral about the dangers of buying used electronics. The episode ends on a lingering shot of the family sitting on the couch in total silence, just staring blankly at the empty wall where the TV used to be. The camera pulls back for an exterior shot of the Griffin house. For a split second, the entire house glitches out into static noise, and the audience hears the faint, sinister laugh of the black-eyed Peter before the screen cuts to black.